So, what exactly do you do if you know where the Nazis live? There's this map that I made here. This is based on publicly available information of campaign contributions to a white nationalist, white supremacist mayoral candidate, I won't name her name, who ran in a recent election in Toronto. And these are all the Nazis that were too stupid to give their contributions under the table. So we actually know where they live. Now, in this video, I won't be showing their names or their full address. We have it down to the apartment number and exactly how much they donated. You can find that information on your own, or private message me or something like that. I don't think it's a good idea for me to be putting people's personal names and addresses in this video with my face in it. But nevertheless, we know where they live. Some of them. We know where the people who gave more than $100 over the board to one specific candidate live. Now, of course, through other means, we know where other Nazis live. But we're left with the question, what do you actually do with this information? See, we have one in England here. We have a handful in the United States, in Tennessee, in Florida, in California, and a handful in British Columbia and in Alberta, and of course mostly in Ontario. Interestingly, none in Quebec, which is, it's nice. I like to think that, Ontario-Quebec solidarity is something that we can grow. Quebec, of course, has a proud socialist and anarchist tradition, and it also has a lot of, let's say, Quebecois supremacists. And maybe some of the First Nations might take issue with the idea that there don't seem to be that many Nazis in Quebec, but it might just be that the Quebecois Nazis are, funding Quebecois Nazis, not funding Anglophone Nazis that are running in Toronto. So, of course, got mostly in Toronto, got a handful in Ottawa here, and, Guelph and a couple in Brampton, Oakville, Kitchener. Not too many. Not too many outside of Toronto. Inside of Toronto, fair number, especially in North York, especially in Etobicoke. Once we get downtown, there's a few, but it's not really that many huge areas of the West End with just none. And that's nice to see. Not that there aren't any Nazis that live there, just that there aren't any Nazis that gave more than $100 above board to this particular Nazi electoral candidate. Get into where I live in the East End, and again, a little handful here, just a few. Most of the East End, there's none. And that's always nice to see. But there are a few. So what do we do with that information? I mean, do you target them in some way? Are we going to, camp out front of those houses and try to pick them off when they come out? Are we going to vandalize the houses? Are we going to do something with this information? We're just like, oh, the Nazis live nearby, and oh, and my neighbor the Nazi. I'll just keep that in mind and not do anything about it. Well, I mean, obviously, we're going to end up in some ethical issues if we did want to target these people. For one thing, we don't know that they gave their actual address. They may have used somebody else's address, or they may have, maybe it's the one person who lives in the house that happens to support a Nazi candidate, but that doesn't mean that other people who live at the same address do as well. They might know that, their uncle, their brother, whoever it is this Nazi, but that doesn't mean that they are, and maybe in fact they're already trying to do something to rein him in and try to change his views. So we don't want to target the wrong people. Also, it's worth mentioning that just because this particular candidate is a Nazi, doesn't mean that everybody who gave campaign contributions over $100 is also a Nazi. They could, for example, have been misguided. They might not have realized what she actually stands for. In some cases, some of these people, as I said, we actually have their names and everything. Some of these people have very Asian-sounding names. So it seems unlikely that, one of these Chinese people who gave her contributions is actually a white supremacist Nazi themselves. They're probably anti-immigrant, they're probably anti-Muslim, and supporting her on those bases. That doesn't mean that they themselves are a Nazi. So how do we distinguish this? Are we going to lump everyone together just because they happened to give money to a Nazi? Well, I mean, that's pretty bad. Let's say, even you might not be a white person, but you're funding white nationalism. Maybe we ought to take some issue with you. That doesn't mean, oh, we're going to go kill all these people. That's probably very bad idea for a variety of reasons. We can also consider that many of these people might be armed and might defend themselves, or the legal ramifications of attempting to do something against them might outweigh any benefit to removing a few of these people from our communities. So, maybe the simpler option is, we go into the area, we try to inform their neighbors, say, hey, do you know Mr. So-and-so lives at such and such an address? Because, I mean, they may have moved, but if you can name them and they know the person by name and say, do you know that person gave campaign contributions to this Nazi candidate, who again I won't name in this video, but I think if you're from Toronto, you probably know who I mean. And maybe that's something that the neighbors would like to know about. Maybe that's something that could lead to something else. But how seriously do we take this? For me, this is an open question. I don't really have a clear answer to this. I think that we need to take it seriously. I think that it's unreasonable for us to just sit back and say, oh, look, there's all these people that are funding Nazism in our mostly progressive, highly diverse city, and we've got people that are committing terrorist attacks in the name of white nationalism and white supremacy, shooting up synagogues, shooting up mosques, not in Toronto, thankfully, but there have been attacks in Toronto. There have been trans people who've been brutalized or otherwise mistreated by some of these far-right extremists. So what do we actually do about it? I don't think that we can just pretend, oh, this isn't a real issue, this isn't going to get any worse. We have to do something, but what? I don't think that we can just, go and actually attack these houses, but I think that this information is very worth knowing about. Now, there have been some articles written that looked up who some of these people actually are, especially the largest contributors. Found, one of them owns a sports bar in the Junction, among other things. One of them is a neurologist. There's, a diversity of people here. There, again, not all of them are white. Most of them are white. Most of them are extremely conservative, et cetera, et cetera. But we don't actually know everything about all of them. And we don't necessarily know what they're going to do next or who else they're going to contribute. We just know their names and addresses. So I want to put that to you. What would you do with this information? Or what should be done with this information? Or what more information would you want in order to be able to do something? Are we going to just sit around, sit on our hands, and let this problem get even worse? And of course, there's the other issue that, you know, uh, even outside of the Nazis themselves, you got a lot of these, classical liberal types who believe, oh, everybody ought to have a voice and a platform. We can't possibly be targeting people for their political views, for who they support in an election. That's just unthinkable. What if they then come after leftist candidates or, even centrist party like the Liberals who maybe do one thing that seems progressive enough, and suddenly liberals are going to be targeted. And at the same time, if we look at it from a far left perspective and say the conservatives actually aren't that far off from the fascists. In fact, they're flirting with the fascists very often. In fact, you could say that many conservative candidates are just covert fascists or believe in white nationalist values, but just know not to be too explicit about it most of the time. Sometimes they get caught. And then we can look even further and say, well, actually, the liberals themselves, much as they're not actual overt out there Nazis, they're not tweeting the 14 words and all this sort of thing. Maybe they even actively oppose racism, but they still uphold racist institutions. They only oppose explicit racism and fail to actually change the conditions which perpetuate racism. So we have all these First Nations in Canada that continue to really get screwed over and not given the support that they were actually promised, not given the rights that they deserve. So if the Liberals are upholding white supremacy and the Conservatives are upholding white supremacy, suddenly we have to deal with a lot more than this number of dots, right? This is a fringe candidate who only won a few percentage in a municipal election. But if we start looking at more mainstream forms of white supremacy, suddenly it's a lot more than these few people, and suddenly the idea that, oh, I could personally go to, each of these houses and do something, maybe put up some signs saying who the person is, or whatever you think is the appropriate action to deal with a Nazi in your community. if it's not just these few, but suddenly it's 10 on every block because we're including the liberals, or it's 2 on every block because we're including the conservatives, and this is in East End, these are all NDP ridings for the most part here, well, suddenly this problem is going to spiral out of control really quickly. So I don't think that it's really clear what we're actually supposed to do about this. And we also need to consider that, you know, the most dangerous Nazis probably aren't the ones who let their name and address appear in publicly available documents proving that they supported a Nazi candidate. The ones who actually know anything about info security and know that there are anti-fascists and other people who might take issue with the fact that they're supporting Nazis, they might hide that information, right? So these are just the ones that are too stupid to do that, which means they can also act as a canary in the coal mine. If these start getting targeted, then maybe the other Nazis are going to freak out and do something more active. But then again, they're already about as bad as they can be. I don't think that we need to be so concerned about provoking violence from Nazis. Oh, there's going to be backlash. They're going to target us. I think if we went after liberals, that would definitely be the case. But the Nazis are already doing the most that they can in order to to destroy us as gender minorities or as religious minorities, etc. They're already having these Islamophobic marches. They're already threatening people. They're already doing a lot of terrible stuff, and it's just going to get worse. And the longer we don't do anything about it, the worse it's going to get. So yeah, I just want to put that to you. What do you do with this information?